2 months ago, I made a video about the Mont Pelée disaster. And in that video, I repeated the story almost everyone knows. One man survived an entire city. Then your comments started coming in. He was not the only one. There was a shoemaker. There was a girl in a boat. Maybe there were 3 survivors, not 1. The famous version goes back to a Circus poster from 1903. The only living object in the city of death. So I opened the French sources from 1902, and the legend started to fall apart. This is how a disaster became advertising, and advertising became history. Before we get to the names, here is the disaster in 20 seconds. On May 8, 1902, a pyroclastic density current broke from Mont Pelée and dropped into Saint-Pierre. It moved like a hurricane and carried heat strong enough to melt lead. In less than 2 minutes, almost the entire city was dead. That is why the survivor question matters. This was not survival from a normal fire. It was geography, shelter, and physics. Let's start with the story that made me reopen the case. The girl in the boat. Her name was Havivra Da Ifrile. The popular legend runs like this. On the morning of May 8th, 10-year-old Havivra was running an errand for her mother. She saw black smoke rising from the crater, sprinted to the shore, jumped into her brother's boat, and took shelter in a coastal sea cave. The burning cloud passed over her. The water in the cave came to a boil and rose to the ceiling. The boat was carried out to open ocean. Several days later, sailors from the French cruiser Suchet found the burned girl drifting 2 miles from shore. It is an extraordinarily cinematic story, a ready-made scene for a Hollywood film. I would gladly have built the video around it. But I have to be honest with you. I could not confirm this story in the primary record. Her name does not appear in the early French sources or the official records. Jean Hess, who wrote in detail about the work of the Suchet and the people it pulled from the water, does not mention any girl in a burned boat. Havivra's entire connection to the Suchet rests on a single early newspaper item and its reprints. From there, the text was copied into cheap disaster anthologies, and a century later, onto the internet. I can't say with absolute certainty that she never existed, but in the strict documentary record, Havivra Da Ifrile remains a newspaper phantom. There is no confirmed 3rd survivor inside the city. That was not the only beautiful story that collapsed when I went back to 1902. In the last video, I used a line. Men at cafe tables, their forks still raised. Women with their hands frozen on door handles. That fairy tale of a modern Pompeii had been printed by the press for decades, and I trusted the theatrical version of it. Robert T. Hill, a geologist who worked the site, published a firm rebuttal in National Geographic in July 1902. The myth of the interrupted breakfast is false. Hill found no forks over plates, no hands on door handles. Bodies lay in the contorted postures of flight. A glowing cloud does not freeze time over the morning coffee. People saw the wall of fire coming. They threw themselves into shelter on instinct, and they died in active motion. The major outlets simply preferred the elegant pose to the physical struggle. They did the same thing with the survivors. The second name from your comments was different. This one was real. Léon Compère-Léandre was a 28-year-old shoemaker. But to understand why his name disappeared, we first have to return to the man who replaced him in the public imagination, Louis-Auguste Cyparis. His survival is a confirmed fact, but the press distorted the physics of how he survived. And I repeated that error when I called his cell a deep dungeon. It wasn't. The American geologist Edmund Otis Hovey personally examined the site in 1904. It was an old 17th century stone-vaulted chamber, screened by the topography of the hill behind it. Cyparis was saved not by the magic of a dungeon, but by hard fortification geometry. A small ventilation slit faced southwest. The blast came from the north. The mass of Morne Abel and the thick stone walls absorbed the kinetic wave. The angle of the opening cut off the direct thermal strike. It was not a sealed capsule either. Superheated ash and gas did get in. The famous detail about a shirt soaked in urine does not appear in Hovey's early inspection reports. Cyparis was burned severely across his back and limbs. The architecture had merely shaved the hurricane intensity off the impact for the critical few seconds that kept him alive. The shoemaker, Léon Compère-Léandre, was saved by entirely different physics: edge aerodynamics. He was not in a stone bunker. On the morning of May 8th, Compère-Léandre was standing on the threshold of his own wood and stone house on the extreme southeastern edge of Saint-Pierre. When he saw the advancing wall of darkness, he threw himself back inside the room. Angelo Heilprin's 1903 book on the eruption preserved his testimony in full. At the epicenter, a house like that burns in an instant. But at the absolute edge of a pyroclastic cloud, the boundary between life and death is measured in feet. The air in the shoemaker's room turned scalding at once. Compère-Léandre dropped to the floor. Seconds later, other people ran in from the street, trying to escape the heat outside. Among them was a young woman named Delavaux. She fell dead in the room. The current was moving so fast that the fabric of her clothing did not have time to ignite. The superheated air had killed her instantly, from the inside. Compère-Léandre survived that first thermal peak. He lay there for about an hour in a dead city. When the roof of his house caught fire, he got up. Modern articles often write that he jumped into the boiling sea. That's a fabrication. With a severely burned body, he walked nearly 4 miles across scorched ground to the village of Font-Saint-Denis. 2 men, Cyparis in a stone vault at the foot of a hill, Compère-Léandre on the temperature edge of the city. So how does a dead city of 30,000 become the story of one prisoner? The mechanism for manufacturing the myth is documented by the hour. It started with a naval telegram. On the evening of May 8th, the commander of the Souchet reported to Paris, approximately 30 people saved. He was telling the truth, but those people had been pulled by sailors out of the boiling water in the harbor and lifted off burning ships. None of them had been found alive in the streets. The global wire services did not bother to clarify the geography of the rescue, and by the next morning, the press on every continent was announcing 30 surviving townspeople. When it became clear that the city itself was dead, the news cycle needed a new focus. That summer, American papers ran the story of a sole survivor named Raoul Sartou. No such person had ever existed. The myth of the lone prisoner was written and sold before the reporters had even learned Cyparis's actual name. The template had outrun the reality. When Cyparis was finally identified, the entertainment industry turned him into a product within months. In 1903, Barnum Bailey took him to the United States. Exclusivity was the central condition of the show. They displayed him in a cheap replica of his cell. The circus had no use for the edge physics of a shoemaker. They needed the only living object, and they needed him to sell tickets. They deliberately inflated the death toll on the poster from 30,000 to 40,000 to sharpen the contrast. Major historical outlets preferred the circus version for decades because it was easier. I trusted that institutional consensus. A man in a stone prison is a clean theatrical story. A shoemaker on a temperature gradient is complicated aerodynamics, and complicated aerodynamics doesn't sell magazines. The famous prisoner Louis-Auguste Cyparis died in Panama in 1929. He had been working as a common laborer on the construction of the canal. The exact location of his grave is unknown. The second survivor was Léon Compère-Léandre, a man whose name was on no poster, a man who met the strike on the threshold of his own house, looked death in the face, and walked nearly 4 miles through a burning landscape. He lived another 34 years. I'd have left this story untold. Without your comments, I wouldn't have opened the archives, and I wouldn't have seen the difference between an advertising poster and forensic physics. His story wasn't in my last video, but it is now, because of you.